Okay.
The whirlwind tour continues.
Whirlwind tour continues. So I have 10 minutes to tell you about forecasting the future of the biosphere. So I hope I can convince you that we're making an honest stab. So I think one thing that we've heard coming out of a lot of these talks from biologists, but also in stepping back and thinking about complex systems, that a close to universal signature of complex system is this distribution of frequency of sizes or events, right? We tend to get these inverse relationships between size and number. So if it's looking at the frequency distribution of earthquake intensities, or the distribution of city sizes, or the distribution of extinction events in the fossil record, we tend to see these distributions that tend to have this inverse signature, right? We tend to find a lot of very small things and very few big ones. And so then I think, it kind of goes without saying that, these patterns have been somewhat contentious over the last many decades of people pointing out that these may be general or may not be general patterns. So there's a lot of issues of deeper meaning kind of underlying what these distributions actually mean. Are they deterministic? Is this the process of random processes? Are they the result of general underlying rules that apply across systems, physical and biological systems? And can we actually infer any sort of general mechanistic processes associated with this? But what I would like to emphasize today, I'm going to show you two examples, mainly from biology, in that these are powerful baselines, okay, regardless of what we think is ultimately causing them. They actually enable us to kind of organize our questions, and they're signatures then of these systems that enable us to actually do very powerful things. We can potentially predict future change, and we can use them to scale up, okay, go from the micro scale to the macro scale. So because John introduced the Anthropocene, welcome to the Anthropocene. This is the new world we're living in, a time of rapid change. And so as a biologist, in particular an ecologist, we want to know how our impacts, can we forecast our impacts into the very near future? So what I would like to do is focus on two of these distributions. In particular, the Global Species Abundance Distribution, or the GSAD. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to focus on one incredibly diverse group, the land plants on Earth. All right? We wanted to actually know how many species of land plants are there on Earth. Can we actually begin to estimate that? But then we wanted to do something more, not just estimate the number of plants, but we wanted to know, well, how many of those different species are actually rare and how many are actually really common? That is, do we actually see any sort of signature at global scales? So why do we want to know about rare species? Well, rare species are important because if there's one thing that's going to actually predict what's going to go extinct is how many numbers of individuals you have. So once you get past a few individuals, all right, the suction of extinction becomes real. Okay. So in terms of theory, we have some expectations for the distribution of commonness and rarity at really large scales. So if we plot the total number of times a species have been observed versus the proportion of species, many different theoretical approaches actually predicts an inverse distribution. Now the flavor of that distribution actually varies. So if we take the neutral theory, where all species are equivalent in their demographic processes and the probability of speciation and extinction is effectively kind of constant across species, we'd expect this inverse relationship, and actually this distribution should approximate a log series distribution, but on really large global scales, this should start to approximate a Pareto distribution with a slope of -1. Now, if this is a pure sampling issue, that is the abundance of species across the globe is actually given by several different multiplicative processes operating together, we would also expect an inverse relationship, but the flavor of this distribution should come down to maybe a Poisson log normal distribution. So after 10 years of assembling data from numerous botanists across the world, we can actually plot out the distribution of how abundant different species are. And so what I'm showing you are actually three different distributions. These are three different ways then that ecologists and taxonomists go out and sample the world. This is stemming from 200 million observations. So this is the number of times a given plant species has been observed somewhere on the planet. And what we actually found quite amazing about this is that we can not only count the total number of species there are based on all available data, Right? This is from museums and various different locations. So we have estimates of about 435,000 species of plants across the globe. But what's actually really remarkable is that approximately 40% of those species have been observed 5 times or less. So we'll let that kind of sink in. Almost 40% of species, land plant species on Earth, have only been observed. That is, we have an official record somewhere 5 times or less. So rarity is the norm. Most things are rare. What is also interesting is that if you look at the flavor of these distributions, they differ quite dramatically from neutral theory. That is, we have many more rare species than we would expect than from neutrality. So what's maintaining this high number of rare species? Well, we can actually look where in the world these rare species tend to accumulate. And they accumulate in very specific climatic regions and very specific geographies. They tend to be located in tropical mountains, and they're associated with climates that historically have been very stable. Right? These are environments that have not been varying compared to other parts of the planet throughout the Pleistocene and even further back. So these are very climatically stable environments and very unique climate signatures as well. And so what we're thinking is that rare species in general have been sheltered from extinction in the past because they're in very stable environments. So what we can do is we can take that distribution and then we can look into the future. We can ask, well, if we follow the worst case climate change scenario of RCP 8.5, and we can ask, well, what are those climates like into the future? What you'll find is that those climates are very different from the climates then that have sheltered rare species in the past. In particular, the climates of the future are highly variable and quite outside the realm of what most rare species have occurred. So what I'm showing you is a heat map of the projected decreases. So the more intense the color, the more intense then the projected decrease in the future. Okay. So that's just one example. The next example, what I would like to kind of emphasize, is the distribution of body sizes. That is, if we go across and identify small things and big things, what do these distributions look like? So I'm showing you 2 distributions. The blue one is actually from a tropical forest in Panama. This is a small sample of trees in Panama, showing that most trees tend to be small in a forest and a few tend to be really big. Next distribution is actually from a mammal community in Colorado. You've got a lot of small little rodents running around and very few bigger things like bears and moose and so on. These distributions tend to be pretty similar across the planet. It doesn't matter where you are. Now, disturbance and things will influence this, but in general, we tend to see these inverse distributions. There are many more small little things, very few big ones. Well, I will actually argue that perhaps the biggest signature of the Anthropocene is what we're doing to the big things. So human activities across the globe have really resulted in the downsizing of the biosphere. In fact, it's a quite dramatic signal. The more we look into the literature and actually kind of account for what has been happening to the biosphere, it's the disproportionate reduction of the biggest things. And that's important because the biggest things have a disproportionate impact on the biosphere. It's the big things that are the most powerful. So if I can just show kind of a quick summary as we go over the last 100,000 years, if we look at the mean body sizes across different continents, we see not only the loss of the megafauna, that is, big mastodons and things, but this reduction in body size has continued until present. In fact, the last 10 to 20 years has seen a pretty dramatic decrease, not only in the number of the biggest things, but the total number of animals and plants on the planet in general. Since the 1970s, according to the Living Planet report, we've lost about 52% of individuals, of animals, then across the globe. And if we just take some estimates since the rise of human civilization, we've probably lost over 15 billion trees have been cut down. Most of those trees are disproportionately the biggest one. So we've actually lost about 46% of the trees on the planet since the rise of civilization. But it really is the biggest and the oldest trees that are declining at the fastest rate. So this is a big signature on the planet, and we actually don't know what this actually means. What does it mean to disproportionately lose the big things in the biosphere? So there's a distribution of sizes, and the Anthropocene has meant a downsizing. Right? We're disproportionately taking out the biggest things. So we call these big things the Megabiota, right? The largest plants and the largest animals. So can we develop actually a theory for assessing the loss of the Megabiota in the biosphere? So if you were to take out the largest cities and corporations from the economy or the human landscape, you would think that that would be a catastrophic loss. And it would, because like our largest cities, the Megabiota disproportionately control the flow of resources through food webs. They dominate the storage of carbon and nutrients in the biosphere. They're also central nodes of networks of interactions. These are the controlling nodes in the biosphere. They should be priorities for conservation because they're disproportionate. So the Megabiota disproportionately impact biomass productivity and fertility. Building on work that we did earlier at SFI with Jeff West and Jim Brown, we can assess how the metabolism then of the biosphere or a given ecosystem is influenced by these distributions of the distribution of sizes, but also the distribution of metabolism as a function then of body size. And you can show that ecosystem metabolism is directly proportional or scales in some way with the size of the largest individual in your size distribution. So the Megabiota disproportionately impact the flux and storage of biomass and carbon. So to try to assess whether or not we can see what the signal on the scale of the biosphere would be, we started to do simulations on a global scale, where we actually simulate all individuals on the planet by going through 3 different worlds. So we start with a Pleistocene world, a modern world, and a future world, where then we kind of basically drop the size of the largest individual roaming around on the planet, and then ask what then is the impact. So the Mattingly model actually simulates per pixel all of this incredible ecology going on. That is trophic interactions, okay? So we have plants, we have animals, we have ecological interactions going on, and we have specific rules, okay, in terms of what is actually happening. So we have a trophic structure that emerges within each of the different pixels then across the planet, and out pops a distribution of sizes. Right? And a lot of the energetic rules are these allometric or these metabolic scaling rules then that kind of govern how individuals reproduce, how they disperse, how they eat, how they move around, and how quickly they die. So to kind of summarize the take-home message, if we look at the global heterotrophic biomass of the biosphere, the global heterotrophic metabolism, this is the metabolism then of the heterotrophic food web, and the global nutrient diffusivity. This is how quickly nutrients are moving around. And we want to know about how nutrients are moving around because big things, as they move around, they tend to defecate and spread nutrients across the globe. It's one of the main ways by which nutrients are passed across within the biosphere. And if we go from the Pleistocene world to the modern world and we look at the percent change from the Pleistocene to the projected future world, these are pretty significant reductions in the functioning of the biosphere from just losing the largest animals in this case. And so that's a pretty sobering message. And this is probably one of the first estimates, at least on the global scale, what the reduction of the biggest things will actually mean for the metabolism, fertility, and the total biomass of the planet. So to conclude, I've kind of focused on 2 of these size-frequency relationships, the global species abundance distribution, but also these body size distributions, and how in a changing world, but also in kind of a changing ecology, we can use these to try to then forecast the fate of the biosphere in terms of changes in the biosphere metabolism, but also risks then of extinction. So with that, I'll end.
Just quickly, how sensitive is the Mattingly model to assumptions about the structure of your food web? For example, if you consider demographic classes in there or you don't consider, right? Juveniles eating what adults might not eat and so on and so
Yeah,
forth?
that's a really good question, and the quick answer is I'm not sure, but that's something that we're interested in exploring by looking at kind of variation in the different assumptions and that go into it. Now, this is our first pass.
Mhm.
Right.
Brian, how have you tried to model, or how difficult would it be to extend this to model the weight of carbon sequestration by the biosphere?
Yes. So in the paper, we did take a stab at that for the plant component, and it's similar on the order of kind of what we see for the animals in terms of percent reduction. But by far, the majority, if you take any kind of section of forest, the majority of the carbon in the forest is in the big individuals. Right?
So another massive bad news feedback, huh?
Yes.